My name is Frances Alden, and I'm 68 years old. For the last 35 years, I ran a logistics consulting firm that I built from the ground up after my husband died. I survived mergers, market crashes, and men who underestimated me in every boardroom. I outlasted all of them. And 3 weeks ago, I sold my company for $83 million. That night, I hosted a retirement party in my home, the very house my late husband and I bought with our savings back when interest rates were high and dreams felt like things you paid off slowly. The place still smelled faintly of lavender oil and old books, a comfort I never thought I'd trade for anything. It was meant to be a celebration, laughter, candles, a string quartet playing something light in the background. My daughter Julia fluttered from room to room, cheeks pink with pride, holding my arm like I might float away. But it was Travis, her husband, my son-in-law, who insisted on organizing every last detail. "You just relax, Frances," he said. "Let us pamper you for once." Let me tell you something. When a man who's never once offered to carry your groceries suddenly wants to pamper you, check the locks. And your drink. That night, right before the toast, I saw him. He was standing near the drinks table, crystal flutes lined up like little soldiers. He thought no one was looking, but I've spent decades watching body language in high-stakes negotiations. I noticed the way he glanced over his shoulder, the stiffness in his spine, the way he pulled a tiny clear dropper bottle from his coat pocket and tipped it, deliberately, into one glass, the one with the small chip on the rim, the one I always use. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I didn't yell. I just watched him. Travis adjusted his tie, picked up the glass, and headed straight toward me, wearing that too big smile of his, the one that always made me feel like he was trying to sell me a used car. "Frances," he said, "I propose a toast. To you." He handed me the glass. I took it. I smiled. And I waited. A few minutes later, when no one was watching, I walked over to Terrence, Travis's father, who was standing alone by the fireplace, fidgeting with his phone. I set my glass gently next to his, just near enough to his hand, and I walked away. 5 minutes after that, Terrence collapsed, face down on the marble, foam at his mouth, eyes wide with panic, and all I could think was, that drink was meant for me. If you've ever had to smile at someone who wished you harm, you might want to stick around for this one. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about waking up. It's about what happens when a woman like me, quiet, polite, always helpful, decides she's done playing the fool. So if you're watching this, go ahead and hit subscribe. Drop your city in the comments and tell me, have you ever seen someone pretend to care while planning your downfall? Because let me tell you, I have. And they picked the wrong glass. When you've lived as long as I have, you stop needing to raise your voice to be heard. You learn how to listen instead, closely, quietly. You learn that chaos reveals more than calm ever could. And on that night, as my living room turned into a circus of gasps and commotion, I stood still, watching. Terrence, sprawled on the marble, his face twisted in confusion. Paramedics crouched beside him, their voices clipped and efficient. Julia, my daughter, was sobbing into her sleeve, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Travis was doing what men like him do best, performing. "Dad, Dad, can you hear me?" he kept repeating, voice rising just enough to seem concerned but not quite cracking, not enough to be real. But his eyes flicked toward me twice. Once when the first responder asked what Terrence had eaten or drunk, and again when I knelt down beside them, not to help, just to see. I'd held that same gaze across negotiating tables, in courtrooms, in silence after signing multi-million-dollar deals. That wasn't fear for his father. That was panic. And not because someone had collapsed, because it was the wrong someone. He didn't expect me to see it. He didn't expect me to see him. But I did. I had watched every detail, from the bottle he slipped from his jacket to the chipped rim of the glass he reached for. I watched him walk it over with a grin rehearsed in some mirror, raise it with all the charm of a seasoned liar, and wait for me to drink. What Travis didn't know was that I've survived 68 years by reading the room long before anyone else did. You don't build a business in a world run by suits and smirks without learning how to spot a wolf wearing aftershave. The glass he tainted had a small chip on the rim, just subtle enough that no guest would have noticed. But I always noticed. I'd kept it for years. Stubborn sentiment. My late husband bought the set the year our daughter was born. He chipped that one, loading the dishwasher too rough one Thanksgiving. I never threw it away. Something about imperfection comforts me. Travis used it against me, and that was his first mistake. I stood in the doorway of the dining room while the paramedics loaded Terrence onto a stretcher. Someone tried to hand me a glass of water. I declined. The clinking of ice in the cup irritated me. Everything irritated me now. Julia came over, red-eyed, her hands trembling. "Mom, oh God, did you see what happened? He just collapsed. 1 second he was fine, and then..." I placed a hand on her back gently. "I saw, sweetheart. These things happen." Her relief was palpable. Not that her father-in-law had survived, but that I wasn't asking questions. She looked up at me. "Do you think it was his blood pressure?" I smiled faintly. "Could be. Or maybe he drank too fast. The champagne did have an odd aftertaste, didn't it?" She froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. A flicker in her pupils, a tightening at the corners of her mouth. Travis joined us. "They're taking him to St. John's. They think it might have been a reaction to something he ate." "Maybe," I said, eyes locked on his. "Though it's funny. I heard him mention the champagne tasted bitter." Another flicker. If they were better actors, I might have questioned my instincts. But Travis couldn't hide the way his eyes darted around the room, scanning for what was left behind. I imagined him wondering, did she drink it? Is the glass gone? Will the residue be found? Julia was rubbing her temples now. "Mom, you shouldn't be on your feet, all this stress." There it was, the subtle pivot. From concern to control, gently coaxing the old woman back to the sidelines, making sure I stayed tired, overwhelmed, out of the way. I looked between them, my daughter and her husband. They used to hold my hands with chubby fingers and wide eyes. Now they looked at me like I was furniture with a will. And I repeated something in my head like a mantra. I didn't survive 68 years to be outwitted by a man who forgets to say thank you. The ambulance's siren faded in the distance. Guests began shuffling out quietly, unsure of whether to say goodbye or just vanish. The party was over. The show, however, had just begun. I walked into the kitchen, my heels clicking against the tile, echoing louder than the string quartet ever did. I poured myself a fresh glass of champagne from an unopened bottle. No chips, no poisons, just quiet, bubbling clarity. Then I picked up the chipped flute, the one meant for me, and placed it carefully into a Ziploc bag, just in case. Because you see, I may be aging, but I am not forgetful, and I remember everything. The next morning, I woke up before the sun and shuffled into my kitchen in slippers and silence. The house smelled like lemon oil and leftover perfume. Faint traces of the party still clung to the air, like the ghost of something that had pretended to be joyful. I warmed the kettle and reached for the raspberry tarts I had stashed in the fridge 2 days ago, the good kind from the French bakery down on Linden Street. The crust crumbled exactly the way it should, and the berries were just tart enough to make your lips purse. Travis once said, jokingly, "These things are as sour as your mother-in-law's face when I walk in." I smiled at the memory, not because it was funny, but because of how often truth hides inside humor. He always wrapped his contempt in charm, like a gift box you don't realize is empty until it's too late to return. I sat at the table with my tart and tea, the light filtering in through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Out in the garden, the rose bushes rustled in the early breeze. My husband planted those roses himself 23 years ago. They'd outlived him. outlived a lot of things. The phone rang. Julia. Her name lit up the screen and I let it buzz twice before answering. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, soft as steam. "Mom, hi." Her voice was tight, controlled, like someone holding a paper cup full of scalding water. "I was just calling to say, I don't think it's a good idea for you to come to the hospital today." I let the silence linger for a beat too long. She rushed in to fill it. "I mean, with everything that happened last night, and your age, I just think you should rest. We're all still trying to figure out what caused Dad to collapse. The doctors say it could have been a drop in blood sugar or, stress." I took a slow sip of tea. Poor Terrence. "Exactly. He's awake now, but he's a little confused. I think too many visitors would just make it worse." "Of course," I said. "You're probably right." But I didn't believe a single word. I hung up and changed into something simple. Gray slacks, a pale blue blouse, and flats with no sound to them. Before I left, I glanced at the kitchen counter. The chipped champagne glass was still sealed in the plastic bag inside a Tupperware container, tucked discreetly behind the flour canister. Evidence. Not that I knew what to do with it yet, but I wasn't about to throw away proof. The drive to the hospital was uneventful. I took the long way. Past the old oak tree by the school, the dog park with the crooked bench, the bakery where I'd bought the tart. The world was moving forward like it always did, as if a man hadn't dropped to the floor right next to my Persian rug last night. At the hospital, I walked with confidence, like I belonged there. When you're a woman of a certain age, people tend to assume you're harmless. I've always used that to my advantage. Terrence was in a small shared room on the 4th floor. He was awake, sitting up slightly, his eyes glassy but lucid. "Francis," he said when he saw me, "well, I'll be damned." "Don't swear," I replied gently. "You're too old for hell." He chuckled, then winced. "My mouth tastes like chemicals." "I brought you some lemon water," I lied, handing him a bottle I'd picked up downstairs. He took a sip and sighed. "They think I fainted. Some sort of episode, but I've never fainted in my life." "Do you remember anything strange from the party?" I asked casually, easing into the chair beside his bed. He squinted. "Just a weird taste. The champagne? I don't know. It had a sharpness to it. Bitter. Metallic." My fingers tightened slightly on my purse strap. Metallic. "It was the glass near your phone, wasn't it?" I asked, as if piecing together a fuzzy memory. He nodded. "Yeah, I think so. Why?" "No reason," I said. "Just trying to remember where I left mine." We sat in silence for a few moments. Machines beeped in the background. The curtain swayed gently in the air conditioning draft. "I could have died," he said quietly. "But you didn't," I said. "You're lucky." He gave me a look. "That wasn't luck, was it?" I didn't answer. Terrence may have been a drinker, a blowhard, and a man who'd once told me feminism was just a phase. But he wasn't stupid. When I stood to leave, I glanced once more at his pale, tired face, and for the briefest second, I felt something soft for him. Not affection, not forgiveness, but a recognition. We'd both been used by the same people, the same house, the same smiles. I walked back to my car and sat behind the wheel without turning the key. Instead, I opened the notepad on my phone and typed a list of 2 names. Julia. Travis. Then below that, I added a new heading. Motive. Because if you want to survive betrayal, you don't wait for justice. You map it out, line by line, and you start early, over raspberry tart and black tea, while the world still thinks you're harmless. There was a time when Julia would sneak handwritten notes under my pillow, crooked hearts drawn in crayon. "I love you, Mommy," spelled backwards and upside down. When she was 6, she used to braid my hair while I drank coffee, humming made-up songs as if the world outside our kitchen window didn't matter. She was soft then, pure, mine. Now she hides poison in champagne flutes. It's a cruel thing, how motherhood stretches your heart beyond what it was designed to bear, and when it breaks, it doesn't shatter. It tears slowly, quietly, like a favorite sweater unraveling stitch by stitch. After visiting Terrence at the hospital, I drove straight home. The house was spotless, almost suspiciously so. Champagne bottles gone, napkins folded neatly. Someone had come through while I was gone and scrubbed the crime scene clean. Probably Julia, always eager to tidy up messes she couldn't emotionally confront. I stood at the base of the stairs for a long time before walking up. In the hall closet, I reached for the worn shoebox on the top shelf, labeled in my handwriting, "Important Personal." Inside were things I hadn't touched in years: copies of our marriage certificate, my husband's death notice, old insurance forms, Emma's kindergarten drawings, and beneath them all, the business card of a woman who never once sugarcoated anything. Denise Hartwell, attorney at law, estate planning, wills, trusts. The card still smelled faintly of her cologne. I stared at her number. I hadn't called Denise in nearly a decade. Not since I first drafted my will after George died. Julia had been 27 then, newly married, just starting her life with Travis. I remember how proud she looked in her ivory dress, how her hands trembled when she said, "I do." And now? Now I had to ask myself if she was capable of killing me. I held the card in both hands, letting the edges bite into my skin. I thought about all the things I'd given her, my time, my money, my forgiveness. Every loan I called a gift. Every favor I chalked up to love. Every month I covered their mortgage shortfalls without asking too many questions. I looked at her name on my phone. Julia. Just Julia. No heart emoji, no nickname. Just the name of the woman who once put butterfly clips in my hair and now had reason to see me dead. I pressed call, but not on her. I called Denise. She answered on the third ring, brisk and efficient as ever. "Francis," she said, voice low and sharp like a surgeon's scalpel. "It's been too long." "Not long enough," I replied. "I need to see you." There was a pause. "Tomorrow morning, 10, my office. Bring everything." We didn't need to say more. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen staring at the kettle as it began to boil, and the sound reminded me of Julia crying as a baby, how I used to rock her back and forth until my arms ached, humming songs I barely knew the words to. She used to grab my necklace with her tiny fists and pull herself toward me like I was gravity itself. When did that change? When did I stop being her center and start being her obstacle? The sliding door to the garden was cracked open. The smell of roses drifted in, sharp and heady. George's roses. He'd planted them before Emma was born, promising me a new bush every spring. I never kept up with them after he died, but somehow they still bloomed. Maybe grief is like that, wild, persistent, unasked for. I stepped outside, barefoot, toes curling against the cool flagstone. A single petal had fallen from the yellow rose bush and landed in my tea, floating like a warning or a gift. I couldn't decide. Travis called me Mom in front of guests last night. The word had a sweetness that felt performative, like overripe fruit. His compliments came too easily, too rehearsed. "You look stunning tonight, Francis. That color really suits you." He'd said it while adjusting his cufflinks, not even meeting my eyes. His eyes always drifted toward my necklace, toward my hands, toward the ring George left me, a sapphire set in antique gold, the one I never took off, the one he once asked about during dinner, saying, "I've always wondered what that's worth." I told him it wasn't for sale. Neither am I. Back inside, I found the chipped champagne glass still in its container. I placed it carefully in a lockbox along with Travis's place card from the party and a copy of the guest list. Evidence. I didn't know what would be useful, but I knew I needed to preserve everything. People make mistakes when they think they've already succeeded. This was no longer a hunch. This was an investigation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretched across the living room floor, reaching toward the fireplace where family photos once stood. Most of them were boxed up now, not out of bitterness, just clarity. I no longer needed reminders of what I wished my family had been. The truth was more useful than nostalgia, and the truth was, I didn't just suspect my daughter and her husband, I believed them capable, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't say, because of the way Julia's voice shook when she told me not to visit the hospital, because of the way Travis's hand lingered just a second too long on the champagne glass, because deep down, some part of me recognized the silence between their words and how loud it had become. I didn't survive 68 years to be undone by whispers, and I didn't raise a daughter to watch her marry a man who thought murder could be poured over ice and served in a flute. So I made a list of names, of dates, of everything they'd ever asked of me, and I sharpened my memory like a knife. Tomorrow I would see Denise, and together we would begin. It had been years since I touched that laptop, a clunky silver thing with a humming fan and a screen that flickered when the hinge wobbled. George had bought it for me on our anniversary, his last gift before the cancer took hold. "You're too good for pen and paper," he joked, kissing the top of my head, handing me the box like it contained treasure. But I still preferred the weight of a leather-bound notebook in my hands. I trusted ink more than pixels. That morning, I placed both in front of me, the old MacBook and my navy blue ink pen, resting atop a well-worn leather journal I kept hidden behind the spice rack, the same one I'd used to jot down milestones, grocery lists, snippets of conversations, and, more recently, quiet betrayals. I flipped through the pages. On one side, I wrote, "Loan $5,000. Julia's failed candle startup." Further down, Travis's investment in crypto, $12,000, never repaid. A second honeymoon to Bali, a mortgage cosign, the leased Mercedes, birthday checks, emergency dental bills, a replacement phone, a dozen gifts that had been called from the heart, but somehow always ended up funded by mine. By the time I'd listed it all, the total had passed $300,000. Quiet withdrawals from my savings, masked as kindness, masked as love, no more. I opened the laptop. The password was still George's birthday. A moment passed as it booted up, and I stared out the window. The roses were blooming violently, red, orange, even the rare violet ones I thought had died years ago. Life always finds a way to come back if you leave it alone long enough. Then came the desktop screen. I opened the folder marked Estate and pulled up the draft of my will. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then I began to delete, line by line. Julia's name disappeared from the inheritance section. So did Travis's. I paused before erasing Emma's, my granddaughter's, but I didn't remove her completely. Instead, I moved everything, every dollar, every property, every asset, into a blind, irrevocable trust. A structure Denise had once explained to me as the legal equivalent of a steel vault, with no key except yours. Emma would benefit when she turned 30, not a minute before. As I typed, the sound of the keys reminded me of rain on the windows, precise, soothing, familiar. There's a certain rhythm to reclaiming control over your life. It starts slow, then gains momentum, like a heartbeat after shock. I titled the document, New Directive, FA. Then I printed it. The paper was warm in my hand, heavy, final. When I met Denise that afternoon, she didn't ask why I looked paler or why my hands trembled slightly as I passed her the folder. She just reviewed the documents, red pen gliding across margins with a calm intensity that reminded me of surgeons in old medical dramas. "You've always been generous, Francis," she said, eyes not leaving the paper. "But generosity without boundaries becomes a map for people like them." I nodded. "I've redrawn the map." She looked up at me. "If you want them to stop," she said, "you have to make them scared of trying." It was a sentence that sat in the air like incense, heavy, unblinking, sacred. "I know," I said. That's why I'm here." Denise reviewed the trust setup, nodding with approval. "This locks it in. No access without your permission. You can even write in contingencies, clauses that trigger if anything happens to you under suspicious circumstances." My heart fluttered, just slightly. Like being poisoned? She didn't blink. "Exactly like that." I handed her the leather journal. "Keep it," I said. "Make a copy if you need, but don't lose it. That's my proof." Denise held the notebook like it was gold. She respected records. She understood that memory, especially a woman's memory, had often been dismissed, questioned, rewritten by others. But I didn't survive 68 years, a marriage, a death, and 3 decades of business negotiations to have my reality gaslit by a smiling man in a tailored suit. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table again. The ink pen rested beside me like an old friend. I wrote a new entry, March 3rd. Spoke with Denise. Will revised. Trust locked. Emma protected. Below it, I added a line I hadn't thought of in years. George would have told me to trust my gut. I am. I folded the paper, slipped it inside the back of the journal, and wrapped a rubber band around the whole thing. Then I tucked it under a loose floorboard in my bedroom, the same one Travis had once stepped on, cursing as it creaked beneath his weight. Fitting. Let him walk over it? Let him pretend he's already won? Let him keep underestimating me? What I had now wasn't anger. It was calculation. What I felt wasn't fear. It was clarity. They didn't know I'd seen them. They didn't know the will had changed. They didn't know the money was gone. They didn't know I was planning to stay alive long enough to make them regret everything. So I waited. Not for justice, not for forgiveness, but for the next move. The knock came at 10:03 a.m. Julia never arrives early and never without warning. But that morning she was punctual, cheeks flushed, smile a shade too bright. Travis followed closely behind her, holding a cake box from that overpriced French bakery downtown, the one I used to love before they sold out to a corporate chain and started using artificial vanilla. "We thought we'd surprise you, Mom," Julia chirped, stepping into the kitchen with her signature fake cheer. "Just a little something to brighten your week." I looked at the cake as Travis set it down on the counter. It was frosted neatly, pale pink roses piped along the rim. In the center, "To new beginnings." I raised an eyebrow. "Raspberry vanilla sponge," Julia added, "but sugar-free. You know, better for your age." "Better for my age, right?" Travis poured tea without asking, like he owned the place. The clink of porcelain against porcelain felt invasive. His movements were rehearsed, even elegant like a politician kissing babies. I took a seat. "So," Julia said, smoothing the front of her blouse, "we've been thinking, maybe it's time you considered some help. You've been through so much. The party, Terrence's scare, the stress." I nodded slowly. Stress ages you, makes you forgetful. Travis leaned forward, placing a glossy brochure between my teacup and the napkin ring. I recognized the cover before reading it. Sunrise Village, a place to age gracefully. The kind of place with hydrangeas by the front gate and linen curtains that smell like bleach. They have round-the-clock nurses, he added. Chef-prepared meals, daily yoga. Julia and I even toured it. Beautiful grounds. His eyes sparkled with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for stock windfalls. "We thought we could help cover the initial deposit," Julia said gently. "Just until the sale of the house is finalized. You'd be so comfortable there." She touched my wrist like it was a delicate vase. I studied the brochure. Every page was smiling seniors, art classes, someone playing chess in a sunny garden. It was designed to feel like freedom, but I saw it for what it was, a padded cage. They wanted me out of my house, away from my network, away from Denise, away from my documents, away from the truth. I looked up and smiled. "You know," I said softly, "I've actually been thinking the same thing." Their eyes widened, not with concern, but with hope. That glint of triumph people get when they think the chessboard is finally tilted in their favor. Really? Julia blinked. You'd consider moving? I took a slow sip of my tea. You're right. Maybe I do need a change. Somewhere new, somewhere safe, somewhere I won't be a burden. Travis visibly exhaled, then picked up a fork and began slicing the cake. His hands were steady, like a surgeon's, laying the first slice onto a delicate porcelain plate. To fresh starts, he said, raising his tea. I raised mine too. To clarity, I replied. We all clinked our cups, and the sound echoed too loud in the room, like something breaking beneath a calm surface. Later, after they left, I stood at the sink with my untouched cake slice. I scraped the frosting off with a butter knife and rinsed it down the drain. The roses in the garden were starting to wilt. I watched the petals tremble as a breeze passed, knocking a single bloom loose. It spiraled downward, soft and slow, until it hit the stone walkway with a sound I imagined, but didn't hear. I looked down at the brochure again. The last page had a form to assign medical power of attorney, already pre-filled, already signed, just missing one thing, my signature. I smiled. Not today. They thought they'd won, that I'd cave. That age dulled my edge, but I didn't survive all these years by being naive. I was tired, yes, but I wasn't weak. The performance was flawless. So flawless, in fact, they believed it. And that was exactly what I needed. Because the best way to disappear, let them think they've already buried you, and I had just begun to dig. The van arrived just after noon, unmarked except for the faint company logo on the side. Safe Haven Security Systems. 3 young technicians stepped out, all khaki pants and polite smiles, carrying toolkits that jingled like oversized keychains. I opened the door before they could knock. Package theft, I told them, the excuse I'd rehearsed. This neighborhood isn't what it used to be. I'd like cameras, motion sensors, the works. They nodded. No questions asked. Men in this line of work rarely care about the real reasons women like me install security. They assume we're paranoid, forgetful, lonely. Maybe I was all 3. But I was also preparing for war. As they drilled into the walls, threading wires through crawl spaces and nailing sensors above the doors, I moved through the house with a practiced calm. How long will this take? I asked, pouring coffee I had no intention of drinking. 4 hours, one replied. You'll barely notice us. But I did notice. The sound of drilling echoed like gunfire, the faint whir of wires slithering behind drywall, the red LED of the first installed camera blinking steadily above my foyer, like a heartbeat. The light felt almost holy, a beacon, the glow of awakening. I stood beneath it longer than I should have, watching that tiny flash until one of the men caught me staring and cleared his throat. You'll be able to monitor everything from your phone, ma'am. Password protected. Nobody but you. Good, I thought. Nobody but me. When Julia called later that evening, her voice had its usual coating of sugar. Hi, Mom, how was your day? You didn't get lonely, did you? I almost laughed. Lonely? My house was crawling with hidden eyes. I kept busy, I said, letting the lie drip smooth as honey. Baked a pie. Read. Some. Tried to nap, but you know how it is. Oh, Mom, she cooed. You really should think about Sunrise Village. They'd keep you entertained. Activities, outings. I'll think about it, sweetheart. Another lie. Delivered with a smile she couldn't see. It struck me then. How easy lying had become. How natural. How freeing. For years, I'd kept my truth bottled up, swallowing anger like bitter medicine. Now deceit flowed out of me effortlessly. It wasn't sin, it was survival. Later that night, after the technicians had packed up and left, I walked through the house in silence. Every corner hummed with a new kind of energy, the subtle whir of cameras, the soft click of sensors arming, a new rhythm layered over the heartbeat of the house, and then, in the hallway, I stopped dead. There it was, Julia's wedding photo. She'd been radiant that day, hair braided like I used to do when she was little, only looser now, cascading over her shoulders, her smile wide, unguarded, hopeful. I felt my throat tighten, my chest clenched as if I'd been punched. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The tears came uninvited, hot and fast. I pressed my palm against the wall, careful not to smudge the fresh paint, and forced myself still, because what I wanted to do, what my body begged me to do, was crumble, sink to the floor, wail like the widow I once was. But I couldn't, not now. I swallowed it down, every tear, every memory. I forced my lips into a thin line, inhaled through my nose, and whispered the mantra that had carried me through boardrooms full of men waiting for me to break. I didn't survive 68 years to fall apart over sentiment. The camera above the hallway blinked again, red and steady, watching me. I straightened my shoulders and wiped my face. The house was different now, not just safer. Mine again. For the first time since George died, I felt like I was claiming space rather than merely inhabiting it. When Denise called to check in, I told her about the installation. "Good," she said. "Keep the footage. If anything happens, timestamps matter." I understand. And Francis, don't just protect your assets. Protect yourself. Don't underestimate how desperate they might become. Her warning echoed through the receiver like church bells. Desperate. I thought of Julia's too bright smile, Travis's careful hands slicing sugar-free cake, their voices wrapped in false concern. They already were desperate, and desperate people don't stop. They escalate. Before bed, I walked once more through the house. I passed the foyer, the dining room, the kitchen where the cake still sat untouched. Each new camera light blinked like a constellation guiding me. Upstairs in my study, I opened my leather journal. The navy pen bled onto the page with calm certainty. March 5th. Cameras installed. Julia called. Lied convincingly. Control regained. I paused, then added a second line. Nearly broke. Down at the photo. Must not falter. I closed the book, pressing my palm against the cover until my heartbeat slowed. The cameras blinked steadily in the dark, reminding me of the truth. I was not powerless, not anymore. And if they wanted me gone, they'd have to walk through every beam of light, every sensor, every lie I had already laid, because this time I wasn't just reacting. This time I was planning, and the game had only just begun. I invited Travis to lunch on a Tuesday, not at a restaurant, too public, too many ears. At my house, where the cameras blinked faithfully, silent witnesses in the corners. I made chicken salad, light on the mayo, heavy on the celery. I even set the table with the china Julia always said was too formal for every day. The illusion of civility matters in these games. He arrived on time, crisp as ever in his navy suit, though the tie was loose and his eyes had a sheen of fatigue. Debt has a smell, you know. It clings to the skin. "Smells wonderful," he said, slipping into the chair across from me like he belonged there. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's no trouble," I said with a smile. "I enjoy company." We ate in silence for a few minutes, the clinking of forks echoing through the room. I kept my eyes on him, watching how carefully he chewed, how his fingers tapped the stem of the water glass. Restless, always calculating. Finally, I put down my fork and let my tone soften. "Travis, I was thinking about what you and Julia said the other day, about Sunrise Village." His fork froze mid-air. Then he lowered it slowly, as though afraid of breaking the spell. "Yes? I know I've been stubborn, but maybe you're right. Maybe I do need a place where there's staff on hand, nurses, security, a fresh start." For the first time in weeks, his face lit up with something genuine. Relief, excitement, greed disguised as concern. "Francis, that's wonderful. Honestly, it's the best decision you could make. Julia will be so happy to hear this." I sipped my tea and tilted my head. "There must be costs involved, though. Entry fees, deposits, these things don't come cheap. He leaned forward eagerly, pulling a folder from his briefcase. You're right, but I've already done the homework. Sunrise has a one-time entrance fee, $450,000 all-inclusive. Housing, meals, medical care. After that, just a modest monthly maintenance fee. With your resources, it's practically nothing. And of course, it ensures your comfort for life. His voice was steady, persuasive, the kind of pitch that could sell a storm shelter on a sunny day. I see, I murmured, letting my fingers trace the rim of my glass. And the paperwork? He slid a set of documents across the table. Thick, official-looking. I recognized the structure immediately. Not just residency contracts, but power of attorney buried inside, written broadly enough to hand hymns, the keys to everything I owned. It's standard, he said smoothly. Just authorizes me to handle the logistics if something happens to you. Nothing unusual. In fact, it'll take a lot of stress off your plate. I smiled, folded the papers neatly, and set them aside. If you'd like, I can sign tomorrow. My attorney will need to witness it. His eyes flickered, just for a second. He didn't like the mention of my attorney, but he recovered quickly. Of course, Francis. Whatever makes you comfortable. I leaned back, resting my hands in my lap. You're very thoughtful, Travis. And then it happened. He exhaled deeply, shoulders slumping as if he just dislodged a stone from his chest. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "This money, it'll save our lives." The words pierced me like glass. My throat tightened. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Save their lives. As if mine was currency to be traded. I smiled faintly to hide the tremor in my voice. I'm glad it will help you. He didn't notice the crack in my tone. He was too busy picturing the prize. When he left, he kissed my cheek, chillingly gentle, and carried his folder out to the car. I watched from the window as he slid into the driver's seat, then leaned over to say something to Julia. She was waiting, perched in the passenger seat, fiddling with a small bottle in her hand. I squinted. It looked like one of those supplement droppers she always bragged about. Natural remedies she swore by, little tinctures she claimed boosted immunity or energy. But in that moment, all I saw was a shadow of the champagne vial, foreshadowing, written in glass. The next day, I met Denise. We sat in her office, the city skyline behind her, documents spread across the mahogany desk. She looked at the Sunrise contract, then at me, her brows knitting together. You understand if you sign this, Francis, you're handing over complete control. That's why I'm not signing this one, I said, producing the set she had drawn up. An exact replica, down to the letterhead, the formatting, even the fine print, but with one critical difference. The power of attorney in this version authorized control over an account with a single dollar in it. A decoy. Denise nodded, lips curling into something like admiration. So, when they try to cash in, they'll find nothing but smoke, I finished. We rehearsed the exchange, my signature, their relief, the performance of compliance. All the while, the real estate was safe, the trust airtight, the assets untouchable. Denise leaned back, satisfied. Sometimes, Francis, survival isn't about fighting harder. It's about letting them think they've won. Back home, I positioned the folder carefully on the dining table, right beneath the glow of the foyer camera. I brewed fresh coffee and set out the china again, waiting for them. When they arrived, Julia kissed my cheek. Travis clasped my hand. I handed over the papers, smiled warmly, and said, I think you're right. It's time. They practically glowed. Travis unfolded the pages, sliding them toward me with a fountain pen. Julia's eyes shone, brimming with the future she thought was already in her hands. I signed slowly, deliberately, the cameras above capturing every flick of my wrist. And then I looked up just in time to catch it. Travis winking at Julia, quick, small, smug, but captured. Forever. After they left, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the footage on my phone. There it was. The wink, Julia's smirk, their fingers laced under the table like thieves celebrating a heist. I replayed it 3 times, each time feeling less sorrow, more steel. They thought I had surrendered, that I had bent under the weight of age and guilt. But I wasn't surrendering. I was setting the trap. And the jaws had just begun to close. You don't live 68 years without making strange friends in strange places. Patricia was one of those. A former insurance fraud investigator, now semi-retired, living somewhere near Santa Fe with 3 rescue dogs and an appetite for bourbon and corruption. We met 22 years ago when I caught my then-employee forging vendor invoices. Patricia helped me quietly resolve it, meaning she found where the rest of the money went and ensured it never happened again. We hadn't spoken in 6 years, but when I dialed her number, she answered on the second ring. "Francis, I need someone who can read between numbers again. I thought you'd never ask." Within 48 hours, Patricia sent me a PDF. The subject line read simply, "Your daughter's love letter." There was no poetry in it, just receipts. Travis had refinanced their mortgage twice in the past 3 years. Gambling debts, small at first, then spiraling. Julia had withdrawn a lump sum from an old investment account I'd set up for her college fund, said it was for medical emergencies. In truth, they'd poured it into a failed cafe venture, barely lasted 6 months. But it was page 7 that stole my breath. A copy of a life insurance policy taken out 6 months ago. Policyholder, Francis Caldwell. Insured party, Francis Caldwell. Beneficiary, Julia Langston. Listed as primary caregiver. Benefit, $700,000. My hands didn't shake. I read every word slowly, deliberately, as though trying to confirm I was still alive. There were application documents, Julia's signature, written in her looping, too eager handwriting, Travis's signature as a witness, doctor's notes attached, likely falsified, painting a picture of a woman in early cognitive decline, a photo of me, unflattering, grainy, probably lifted from Facebook. They had written my eulogy in numbers, turned my life into a line item. I should have been enraged, should have thrown something, screamed. Instead, I sat there staring at the screen, letting the knowledge pour in like concrete. There was a micro spike I hadn't prepared for, something deep and sudden. I reached for the tissues but didn't cry. Not at first. Only when I scrolled to the final page and saw the automatic payment setup did it come. A monthly premium, drafted like clockwork, from Julia's account. She believed in it, in my death, in its profitability. I let the tears fall. Not out of betrayal, I had expected that, but grief. The kind that blooms not when something ends, but when you realize it never existed in the way you thought it did. I thought of Julia, at 5 years old, asleep on my chest, her breath warm and even. I used to hum to her until she dreamed. Now she was dreaming of my funeral. Patricia's follow-up call came that evening. Her voice was even, professional, detached, as always. "There's more." Of course there was. "They've listed you as incapacitated in one of the internal notes. I pulled it from the underwriting database. Which means if you die under certain conditions, like in your sleep or from accidental overdose, there's no investigation." I said nothing. Just let the sound of that phrase sit in the air. Accidental overdose. Patricia exhaled. "Francis, I don't say this lightly, but you need to move everything out of your name immediately. House, accounts, anything traceable. If this were anyone else, I'd say go to the police. But I know you." I smiled bitterly. "Yes, you know me." "You're going to handle this yourself?" "Yes." After the call, I printed every page of the report. I placed it in a manila folder and labeled it with a single word, aftermath. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I copied the documents to a secure cloud drive and wrote a letter to my lawyer. In the event of my death, the sentence came naturally. I added, "This is not a melodrama, it's a preamble." Then I slid a copy of the documents into a locked drawer beside my bed, the drawer with the spare will, and the revolver. That night, I stood by the window watching the street below. A breeze stirred the roses in the garden. David Austin's, planted by my late husband the year Julia was born. I remember him saying, "A rose needs pruning to bloom stronger." I hated the metaphor then. I understand it now. You cut away what no longer serves, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. I wasn't done pruning yet, but they had made one critical error. They thought I was still dormant. That age had made me soft, but Patricia had handed me the shears, and I was just getting started. There is a strange kind of pain in signing against your own child. It's not sharp, like betrayal. It's duller, like a bruise that deepens with every heartbeat. I sat in Denise's office, surrounded by cool walls and sharper truths. Her pen sat waiting between us, motionless, silver. She looked at me as though searching for a crack in the stone. "You're certain about this?" "Yes." "If you're wrong, Francis, she may never speak to you again. There's no undoing this, not in court, not in memory. I'm not wrong." She laid the documents out like a priest arranging sacraments. One by one, revocation of the previous will, establishment of a revocable living trust, held under the Francis Caldwell Irrevocable Trust, medical directive reassigned, power of attorney shifted to a third-party firm. Special clause: if any party attempted to coerce or admit me into a care facility under claims of cognitive decline, that party would forfeit all inheritance rights immediately, irrevocably. Denise had drafted it beautifully, surgical, elegant. The kind of language only lawyers and wolves could admire. My hand didn't tremble as I signed, page after page, signature after signature. But it wasn't just ink on paper. It was surrender and defiance, love and its severance. I was cutting a cord I never thought I would touch, the one between mother and daughter. Not because I stopped loving Julia, God, no, but because I finally started loving myself more. After we were done, Denise placed all the signed documents into a leather folio and slid it across to me. "You have witnesses scheduled tomorrow at 10 a.m. Once it's notarized, this becomes your legal armor." "And Julia?" I asked. "She won't know until she tries to touch it." She paused, then added quietly, "They'll come for you harder after this, Francis. You need to be ready." "I've been ready since I saw him poison a glass." Denise nodded. Her fingers tapped the table lightly. Then she reached into her desk and handed me something unexpected, a small sealed envelope. "What's this?" "A note. For your granddaughter, if you ever need it." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the one with the dent in the corner from when Julia threw a spoon in frustration at age 9. I remembered that moment with strange fondness. It was the last time she had expressed pure, unfiltered emotion without calculation. I took out my fountain pen, navy blue ink, and pulled a fresh note card from my drawer. It smelled faintly of old cedar and lavender, my favorite scent combo. I began writing. "My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, it means time has passed and perhaps my voice no longer carries through the rooms you walk in. But I want you to know something with every cell of your growing heart. Your grandmother fought, not with fists nor screaming fits, but with documents, with camera lenses, with quiet resistance. I fought because I knew love should never be weaponized, and I couldn't let silence be the legacy I left you. If I am gone, remember, being quiet does not mean being weak, and being kind does not mean being blind. With all my love, Grandma Francis." I folded the letter and tucked it into a small envelope marked Emma for later. Then I opened the drawer where I kept my silver brooch, the one Emma always loved as a child. I placed the letter underneath it. If she ever came looking through my things, I hoped she'd find both, a piece of me and a piece of truth. Outside, the roses were starting to wilt slightly in the early autumn breeze. I thought of pruning them tomorrow, or maybe not. Maybe it was okay to let some things fade, but not everything. Some things had to be preserved, like dignity, like legacy, like warnings, dressed in silk and sealed with care. Denise called me the next morning. Witnesses confirmed. 10 a.m., sharp. You'll be legally untouchable by lunchtime. Thank you. You did the hard part, Francis. I looked out my window as a sparrow landed on the railing. No, Denise. The hard part is pretending I didn't know sooner. The bird flew away and I stood up. It was time to prune what was dying and water what might still grow. There was a kind of theater to it. The way Travis and Julia arrived that morning. Fresh pressed, cheerful, voices too high, smiles too wide. I hadn't seen Julia wear lipstick that red since her engagement party. She must have thought it was her coronation. We brought croissants, Julia said, setting down a white box with trembling hands. Travis added, fresh from that place on Elm you love so much. We thought we'd make it a little celebration. How thoughtful, celebrating my surrender. I placed the leather folio on the table. The fake documents Denise had crafted were pristine, high-quality print with my real signature, and nothing that would actually hold in court. They didn't know that, to them, this was victory. I watched Travis flip through the pages with greedy fingers. Julia's eyes shimmered like someone tasting the horizon of freedom. This is really generous, Mom. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I tilted my head. But I did. I wanted to. You deserve a good life. They didn't hear the ice under my words, didn't see how my fingers trembled ever so slightly under the table, not from fear, from restraint. While they pored over their future, I poured tea. Jasmine, lightly sweetened. I handed Julia her cup, and for a moment, just one, I almost saw my little girl again, the one who used to drink pretend tea in pink plastic cups and say, "Cheers, Mommy," Guerces with wild curls and crooked teeth. She sipped. I sat, folded my hands. So, Travis said, his voice practically skipping, we've already looked into Sunrise. They have a suite open in October. With your signature, we can move fast. He looked at Julia. She nodded. They had practiced this. And your things, of course, we'll pack carefully. You won't have to lift a finger, Julia added. My throat tightened, but I smiled. You two always think ahead. There was a knock at the door. 3 short raps. Precise. Julia stood instinctively. I beat her to it. 2 officers in uniform plus a plainclothes detective. Behind them, Terrence, Travis's father. Still pale from his hospital stay, cane in hand, but standing, firm, upright, alert. I opened the door wider. Officers, I said without looking back, thank you for coming. The room shifted. The temperature dropped. Travis stood abruptly. What's going on? One officer moved forward. Mr. Travis Harper? That's me. The plainclothes detective held up a file. You are being investigated for attempted insurance fraud, attempted elder abuse, and suspected poisoning. You may remain silent or... Whoa, 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 Travis barked, hands raised. What is this? What the hell, Mom? I turned slowly to face him. You really should have read the fine print, sweetheart. Julia clutched the tea mug like it might anchor her in this sudden storm. This is a mistake. This is a mistake, she repeated, voice rising. Mom, why would you do this? My hands stayed folded, because one of you tried to kill someone, and both of you tried to erase me. Travis turned to his father. Dad, please. But Terrence was already handing the officers a USB stick. Security footage from the retirement party. He used my glass. I almost died. The betrayal cracked across Travis's face like glass under pressure. You're turning on your own son? Terrence didn't flinch. You stopped being my son the moment you tried to poison an old man for a check. Julia sat down slowly, almost gracefully. She looked like a statue unraveling from the inside. Mom, I didn't want this. Travis said it would just be a sleeping aid. We just wanted you safe. I looked at her. really looked. Not as a mother, as a woman seeing another woman make a choice. You wanted me quiet, powerless, forgotten, so you could inherit something you never earned. The silence thickened. Then came the zip of the handcuffs, the slow shuffle as Travis was led out, shouting. Julia didn't follow him. She just sat there. When the door closed, I took the papers off the table, their fake treasure map. I folded them neatly and tossed them into the fire pit. The flames took their time. Behind me, Terrence spoke. That was a long time coming. Too long, I murmured. He leaned on his cane, looked around the kitchen. Still smells like rosemary in here. She used to use that soap, remember? I nodded. I still keep it by the sink. He paused. Need company for dinner tonight? Only if you like mushroom risotto. He smiled. I do now. Outside, the garden shimmered with early dusk. The roses hadn't bloomed again yet, but the buds were there, waiting. I poured a new cup of tea. This one was mine, jasmine, with honey, and no one else had touched the cup. When the door finally closed behind the officers, and all that remained was the faint click of their boots on my old wooden porch, I stood there for a moment, completely still. There was no applause, no cinematic music, just silence, heavy and honest. My legs felt hollow, but I walked slowly back through the house, every creak of the floorboard sounding louder than usual, as if the house itself was exhaling with me. I passed the hallway mirror and didn't look. I didn't need to. I knew what was there. A woman who had survived her own erasure. I climbed the stairs one at a time. At the top, I hesitated outside my bedroom door, not because I feared what was inside, but because, oddly, I wanted to enter it as someone new, someone reclaimed. When I opened it, the room greeted me with quiet familiarity. The blue-gray wallpaper, the photo of my late husband on the nightstand, smiling, frozen in a better time, the scent of lavender lingering faintly in the air. I walked over to the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and opened it. The hinges gave a small groan as if it, too, hadn't breathed in a while. Inside was the old blanket, woven, soft, worn at the edges. Lavender sachets tucked in with it had faded, but their scent still clung to the fibers. This was the blanket he used to cover my shoulders when I fell asleep on the couch, the one we took on picnics when Julia was still small and wanted nothing more than to lie in the sun between us, giggling at clouds. I pulled it out gently and held it to my face, not to cry into it, just to remember. I sat down on the edge of the bed, clutching it, not like a weapon, not like a wound, just as something real, something that had lasted. There were no tears, not yet. Not because I wasn't sad, but because sadness was no longer the primary color of what I felt. There was grief, yes, the kind that seeps into your joints, the kind that doesn't scream but aches. But layered beneath it was something else, a quiet dignity, a reminder that I was still here. I stared out the window for a long time. The garden was fading into dusk. The roses hadn't bloomed yet this season. Maybe they wouldn't, but maybe next spring they would. The phone rang. I thought about not answering, just letting it go, but something in my chest stirred and I reached for it. Hello? A pause, then a breath. Grandma? My heart stopped, just for a beat. Emma? I whispered. Yeah, it's me, she said, voice small but steady. I had to look up your number on Mom's old emails. I hope that's okay. I closed my eyes. Of course it's okay, sweetheart. Always. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Mom said, I shouldn't talk to you. She said you're not well, but I don't believe her. I don't believe any of it. My throat tightened. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. I swallowed. Emma, I miss you, I said softly. More than you'll ever know. I miss you too, she replied. I don't care what anyone says. I just wanted to hear your voice." Her honesty undid something in me. "Are you okay?" she asked. I took a deep breath, looked around the room, the worn blanket, the fading light, the air filled with lavender and memory. "I think I am now," I said. She was quiet again. Then, "Can I come see you sometime? Just us. No one has to." "No." A small smile crept across my lips, unforced and real. "You can come anytime, my darling. This house is still yours." "I love you, Grandma." "I love you more," I whispered. "Always." When the call ended, I sat there with the phone still in my hand, the blanket around my shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be strong every second. I could just be. I leaned back onto the pillows, the blanket covering my lap, and let the weight of everything settle without crushing me. Some people think healing looks like big speeches or triumphant declarations, but sometimes it looks like sitting alone in a quiet room, with a lavender-scented blanket and the voice of someone who still believes in you. Sometimes healing is just surviving and knowing that finally you're doing it on your own terms. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. No alarm, no sounds, just instinct. The world outside my window was bathed in that soft golden light only spring knows how to give, where shadows are gentle and every leaf looks like it's been freshly painted. I made my tea, lavender and mint. Sat for a while, let it steep long enough to turn bold. Then I put on my old straw hat, the one with the blue ribbon fraying at the edges, and stepped outside. The back garden was still damp from last night's rain. Dew clung to the blades of grass like tiny diamonds, and for the first time in what felt like years, I walked across them barefoot. The roses had bloomed. They weren't supposed to. Not this early in the season, not after the frost had lingered well into April. But there they were. Dozens of them, proud and defiant, blazing in deep crimson and soft peach, some still curled tight, others full open like mouths telling stories. I stood there for a long time, not thinking, not analyzing, just breathing. There was one rose bush, the one my husband planted the year Julia turned 10. She used to name the blooms, called one of them Marigold, even though it was a pale pink. I'd trimmed that bush back so far last fall I thought I'd killed it. But there it was, blooming like nothing ever tried to stop it. I bent down, touched a petal, silken, alive. "Good morning," a voice called behind me. I turned. A boy stood near the gate, 16, maybe 17, skinny as a rake but polite in that nervous way boys are when they're trying to act grown. Dark hair, buttoned shirt, too big for him. He waved awkwardly. "Hi, Mrs. Ellison? I'm Noah from the high school. You put up a note at the co-op about needing help in the garden." I smiled. "Right on time, Noah." He stepped inside, wiping his feet on the stone path like he'd been raised right. "It's really beautiful here," he said, eyes wide. "You live here by yourself?" His question wasn't rude, just curious, innocent. Still, it landed in a place that used to hurt. I looked around. The roses, the bench beneath the old willow, the bird feeder, the ceramic frog Emma painted for me when she was 6. I turned back to him. "Not exactly," I said gently. "I live with memories and new beliefs." He blinked but nodded. "That's cool." I chuckled. "It is, but come on, let me show you where I keep the tools." As we walked, he asked what kinds of plants I liked, whether I wanted vegetables or just flowers. He told me he liked soil, said it made him feel calm, like working with something that couldn't lie to you. I almost stopped walking then, because that was it. That was the reason I could still trust this place, trust the garden, trust this moment. The ground never lied. It just gave back what you put in, if you were patient enough to wait. We reached the small shed and I handed him the key. "Feel free to organize things how you like," I said, "as long as you don't prune my lavender without asking." He grinned. "Deal." As he stepped inside to start, I sat back on the bench beneath the willow. A little wind moved through the leaves, whispering something soft and almost familiar. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just peace. I closed my eyes. A month ago, I had stood at the edge of a world built on pretense, betrayal, and quiet manipulation. I had faced down people I once called family. Not with fists or fury, but with facts and the quiet, terrifying power of a woman who knows she is done being small. Now, here I was, sitting in a garden that had bloomed again, barefoot in the grass, a high schooler trimming hedges while whistling something out of tune. I was not alone, I was not afraid, and I was not finished. Later that afternoon, Emma would call again, this time to ask if she could come by on Saturday and help me bake. I would say yes, we'd make lemon bars, the messy kind with too much powdered sugar. But right now, in this moment, I just let myself exist. The roses rustled, the birds argued over seed. Noah laughed softly at something in the shed. And me? I sat there, alive, present, and entirely my own. Yes, the roses were blooming, and so was I. Emma came by the next afternoon. She didn't bring flowers or gifts, just herself. A canvas tote slung over her shoulder, her curls still damp from a morning shower, and that familiar look of quiet defiance in her eyes. The same one I used to see in Julia when she was young, before it was replaced by something colder. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked startled, then smiled. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, love. Come in." We didn't rush to speak. Some silences are sacred. I poured us both tea, chamomile with honey, and set out 2 shortbread cookies on a plate with blue edges, the kind Emma always liked as a child. We sat in the sunroom where light scattered through the glass like tiny ghosts dancing. The house was quiet. For the first time in weeks, there was no background fear. She sipped, then looked at me. "Mom told me not to come, said you were manipulating things. But I needed to hear it from you." I nodded. "You deserve to." So I told her. Everything. I told her about the champagne flute with the chipped rim, about Travis's hand moving just slightly out of rhythm with everyone else's joy, about the moment I switched glasses, about Terrence collapsing, foaming at the mouth. I told her about the raspberry tart, the lie in her mother's voice when she said I should have full-time care, the false concern, the gentle cruelty of trying to package abandonment in a brochure with smiling nurses. I told her about the cameras, the forged document, the insurance policy with my name and a $sign where my life should have been. And I told her about the look in her mother's eyes when the police arrived. I didn't leave out a single word. She didn't cry. Not once. She just listened, her hand around the mug, fingers trembling slightly. Then she reached across the table and gripped my hand, strong, present. "You didn't give up," she whispered. I swallowed. I couldn't, not when I still had you. That silence again, a softer one now, one that held warmth. Outside, a bird chirped somewhere near the roses. The scent of lavender still clung to my sleeves. Emma finally spoke again. "Grandma, I'm sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. We don't get to choose where we come from, but we do get to decide where we go from here." She nodded, eyes shining now. "I want to be different." "You already are." We finished our tea. She offered to help trim the garden next weekend. I told her she could bring a friend. "Just no boys who call their mothers bruh," I joked, and she laughed so hard she nearly spilled her cup. As she gathered her things, she stopped at the door, looking down for a moment before turning to face me. "Grandma, was there ever a moment where you almost didn't switch the glasses?" I paused, and then I answered with honesty. Not for a second. I didn't survive 68 years, bury a husband, build a company from scratch, raise a daughter, and stitch together my life after grief, just to be outwitted by someone who doesn't even know how to make proper eye contact. We both laughed, but I meant it. She hugged me tightly before leaving. And as the door clicked shut behind her, I stood in the center of my home, the afternoon sun warming the wooden floor. In the silence, I could hear the faintest echo, the crystalline ring of a glass hitting tile. But this time, it wasn't fear I felt, it was clarity. I had chosen the right glass, I had chosen myself. And now, before we part ways, I'd like to leave something not just for Emma, but for you, wherever you're listening from. Maybe it's a quiet morning and your coffee's just gone cold. Or maybe it's late and stories like mine keep you company when the world gets too loud. If you're here, I want you to know something. I'm 68 years old, and I do not need anyone to redefine my worth. Not my daughter, not her husband, not the world, and neither do you. If this story touched a part of you, I invite you to leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one with gratitude, and if it stirred something in you, even something small, please consider subscribing. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a community that believes in healing, kindness, and second chances. Because sometimes miracles don't knock loudly, they wait patiently. In quiet gardens, in lavender-scented blankets, in chipped champagne flutes, until you're ready to open your heart again. Thank you for spending your time with me, and wherever you are in the world, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is simply stay standing. I did, and I'm still here.